Hi friends, we are back with the next video, and in this section on types of communication, we are now going to discuss the remaining two types of communication, which is formal communication and informal communication. We all know what is formal communication, what is informal communication. Formal communication is very official communication, and informal communication can also be looked upon as a personal form of communication. So again, going back to the X and Y paradigm of communication, because remember, communication only happens communication only happens when there is a sender X and a receiver Y, because communication is a bipolar process or a two-way process. Bipolar because it has a two poles of sender receiver, and two-way because the sender starts the process of communication and the receiver gives the response, which is called the feedback response. Now in this case, when we are talking about official communication, what happens is X, when he sends a message to Y and Y gives a feedback, there is nothing personal about it. It is an official interaction, and Y also gives a due official or a formal feedback. Now in this case, what you have to realize is formal and informal communication, because it always involves a sender and receiver. So it depends on the relationship between the sender and the receiver. What does this mean? This means that if the sender and the receiver are members of the same family, they are neighbors, they are friends, then there is nothing official about the relation between sender and receiver. This could be immediate family, or it could be an extended family. What is an immediate family? Parents, siblings, spouses, grandparents. And extended would be the uncle, the aunts, the cousins, and so on and so forth on both sides. So when X and Y are family, are neighbors, same neighborhood, and friends, the relationship means there is no economic transaction. This is a very, very important rule to be remembered in formal communication and informal communication, which means that X and Y, in their relationship, there is no economic transaction. What is an economic transaction? Economic transaction is, there is, like you go to the market, you buy and sell. Buy and sell. There is an exchange of money. Services. Your mother feeds you, but do you pay your mother in terms of cash? No. Your father pays your school fees, your college fees, your tuition fees, but do you kind of repay that money? No. He's your father. So economic transaction does not exist in relationships between members of the family, between neighbors and friends. Now here you could be giving a gift to the neighbor for the son's birthday or the marriage of the daughter, but that doesn't mean your neighbor is your neighbor. Your tenant and you could be having economic transaction. So we are not involving tenants. Here the tenants are not involved because your tenants pay you and you allow the tenants to live in your house. So there is an economic transaction, there is exchange of money. So what we are looking at here is relationships which do not have economic transaction. So when there is no economic transactions, your communication is personal. And when your communication is personal, you are normally spontaneous, very natural, very joyful. You don't prepare. If your aunt is visiting, you don't prepare the whole night into saying into what to tell her. You're just excited for her to visit and drop in. That's it. So it's spontaneous, it is natural, it is joyful, it is unprepared or unpremeditative. So all these are qualities of personal communication. But when X and Y are related in a relationship that is based on economic transactions, your relationship becomes business. That means, how does it start? Let's say X is you, a young boy or girl around 20 or less. Right since morning, whom do you meet? One, you meet your parents. Your relationship is not with your parents. This is not economic. There's no economic transaction. Your siblings, again no. Then comes your maid, your domestic support system. Your domestic support system and you and your maid, there's an economic transaction. You pay your maid and she gives you her services to clean your house. So this is an economic relationship based on economic transaction. Then you meet your newspaper hawker. Again, you and your newspaper hawker. He gives you the newspaper, you pay him and he gives you the newspaper. Economic transaction. Then you go to your vegetable vendor. He comes in, he carts the vegetable and fruits. Again, you pay and he gives you the vegetables. So, based on economic transaction. So, these are right from the maid, your economic transaction starts. And then you go to, say, college. You have your gatekeeper, you have your teachers, and you have your principal, and you have your vice chancellor. So what starts with the maid, the newspaper hawker, the vegetable vendor, the gatekeeper, maybe your bus conductor, your gatekeeper, your teacher, your principal, and your VC, vice chancellor. These are all, you are there, your newspaper hawker, your maid, your vegetable vendor, then your bus conductor, then your gatekeeper at the college, then your class teacher, your principal, and your VC. So vis-a-vis, all these relationships are based on economic transaction. You pay and your bus conductor gives you a ticket and allows you to travel in the bus. He gives you the services of the transport. You go to the college, your gatekeeper, of course you're not paying him directly. You're paying the maid directly, you're paying the newspaper directly, you're paying the vendor directly. But you don't pay the college gatekeeper. How are you paying him? You are paying him by paying the fees to the college. So you pay and he gets his salary. Similarly, you are communicating with your teacher. Who's why? This teacher. You are paying for the classes and your teacher is getting paid. Similarly, so is the principal of the college, so is the vice chancellor. You are paying your fees, your teacher, your principal, your VC is getting paid for the jobs and the services, and they're communicating. So the moment your relationship enters a relationship based on economic transaction, this transaction could be direct or indirect, your relationship becomes official and your communication becomes formal communication. So what happens in formal? Your communication becomes measured. You could be yelling at your mother. As X, you could be yelling at your mama, give me a cup of tea. Will you shout at your maid? You will not shout at your maid. So you're measured, you're careful, you're cautious, right? Then you think before you speak. You think before you communicate. Before you talk to your teacher, your principal, and especially your vice chancellor, you will think twice before speaking. So it is premeditative communication. Your communication, because you think, it is structured. So what you see is formal communication is official communication, and it is based on relationship, which is based on relationship between the communicators, the sender and receiver. The relationship has to be based on economic transaction. So sender and receiver will communicate formally when the relationship between them is based on some form of economic transaction. Then the communication will be very measured, very careful. The sender and the receiver will think before they speak. As a mother, I could slap my daughter or my son, but I will think twice before slapping, or I'll never be able to slap my students. X and Y will think before talking to the vice chancellor or the principal. The principal also will be cautious before speaking to the students. So and the father and mother won't think twice before speaking. They can speak and, oh, I'm irritated, don't talk to me now, talk to me later, anything. But teacher and the principal will not do that to a student. So what we have realized is the next or the final type of communication is official and or formal or informal communication. Formal communication is also official communication. Informal communication is also known as personal communication. And here what we realize is in official communication, the relationship will be based on economic transaction. In personal communication, it will not be based on economic transaction. So what is then formal and informal communication? We also have types like business communication and corporate communication. What are these then? This is when you look at official communication, formal communication, we realize that X and Y, they are into a relationship that is based on economic transaction. And the examples that we gave was the maid in the morning, the newspaper hawker, the vegetable vendor. ठीक है? Maid, newspaper hawker, vegetable vendor, and so X gets up, he talks to maid in a very careful manner. He doesn't really think, but he's kind of cautious. He's not as spontaneous, and so with the newspaper, so with the vegetable vendor. But there is a kind of personalized touch. Why? Because X knows Y is a male, so X knows Y for since 10 years. So there's a personal charm in the relationship. The newspaper hawker has been giving the paper since X was born. So there's a personal touch and charm in the relation, despite the fact the relationship is based on economic transaction, yet the relationship has some personal touch. So is the local vegetable vendor. So when X communicates Y, there are elements of personal touch, almost like the informal communication. But when this same X goes to say a retail, say a multiplex or a mall or a retail outlet, a shop, instead of this vegetable vendor who has been giving him vegetables since he or she was a child, this X now goes to a retail outlet. Here there is no or nothing personal. Right from the moment X enters a retail shop, X is part of a communication that is systematized. That is systematic, system driven. That means there is a window for everything. The gatekeeper is specific. There's a counter for paying, there's a counter for billing, there's a counter for exchange, there's a counter for asking anything, there's a counter for every possible activity. The shop is divided into systems. And when X has to communicate, X has to follow that system. So when business becomes large, the vegetable vendor is small business, very small business. He doesn't have systems. But when you have a large business selling even vegetables, the business develops systems. You have to pay bills, you have to write to say that billing was wrong, that you need to exchange. If you've taken a kilo of potatoes and you want to exchange the next day, you have to write a letter to the vegetable vendor. But when you go to a retail outlet and you need to exchange half a kilo of potatoes that you bought the previous day, you have to bring the bill that was given to you. You stand in a different counter, you give the bill, you stand in a third counter to return the half kilo of potatoes, and then you stand in the last counter to get your refunds. This is when business communication becomes corporate communication. So formal communication, as you would realize, is business communication, and when business becomes large, it becomes corporate communication. And in this, what we realize is that communication is a continuum. What would this mean? That communication is a continuum. This is something you must realize. That means for any X, it could be you, communication is a continuous process till Y. At every point, there will be a Y with whom you communicate through the day. This could be your mother, this could be your sister, this could be your maid, this could be your newspaper vendor, this could be your retail outlet, this could be your teacher, this could be your VC. There is not any break really. It's a continuous process for any individual. And it all depends on your relationship with your audience, that whether your communication is going to be formal or informal. And if it is formal, whether it is going to be business communication or corporate communication. Business, when the vendor is small, it is not organized, and corporate, your VC is part of corporate communication. He heads a university which is an organized business. But if you go to an informal tuition, your teacher would be part of an informal personal home tuition, and he'll almost be business communication but with a personal touch. So the things that we finally discussed today was the final communication is types of communication is formal and informal, and they depend on X's relation to Y. If X's relationship to Y is not based on economic transactions, they are informal communication, as with family, friends and neighbors. But if it's based on economic transaction, then it becomes business communication. And if business becomes organized, it becomes corporate communication. So if you do a flow chart, what really comes to you is, this is communication. So the first type is your verbal communication. Second is your non-verbal communication. Verbal communication is oral communication and written communication. And oral communication can be formal communication or informal communication. So will be your written formal communication or informal communication. Please take a screenshot of this for your reference, because this is a flow chart that you need to, and non-verbal communication on elements will accompany all this, because as Albert Mehrabian said, that 7% communicated through words and 93 communicated through non-verbal clues. So whether oral, and this really matters in formal communication, even in informal. So whether in market or marriage, this rule holds true, and your communication assumes these types. So friends, do please take a screenshot, and I hope you have enjoyed this session, and we have come to a conclusion to the types, discussion on types of communication. I would really look forward to your comments and your recommendations. Thank you.